Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. It's a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions.
The Overton window is a term for the range of ideas tolerated in public discourse. Joseph Overton stated that an idea's political viability depends mainly on whether it falls within this range rather than on politicians' individual preferences. According to Overton, the window represents the range of policies and ideological concepts that a politician can recommend without appearing too extreme in the eyes of public opinion. In modern discourse, those of us who are concerned about a major shift in the Overton window often use phrases like, things have moved too far to the left, or I didn't leave the Democrats left me. Centrist commentators in the recent years have pointed out a left drift or a left-right divide among American voters. You might have noticed that in the last 2 years, most of what you watch, most of what you listen to, even idle chat at work, probably has become a lot more politicized than it was 3-4 years ago, right? Maybe from the time that you were in high school, if you're older like me, things are dramatically more political across the board in every way. That's due to a dissonance between the Overton window and the populace. For the first time in human history, the Overton window does not accurately show the average opinions of society, but the average opinion put forward by society's proxy, social media. In America, Twitter and Facebook have replaced human representation of the ruling class, meaning that politicians and corporate executives gather their information on public opinion through algorithmic aggregates instead of through chains of real human interaction. Since Twitter and Facebook, especially Twitter, curates content along specific ideological lines of social justice, intersectional feminism, and modern Marxism, the Overton window shows a populace that leans much further left and cares much more about fringe ideological concepts than it actually does. Thusly, those at the top of our society believe that the populace, meaning consumers and voters, want more left-leaning ideas and products than we actually do. Subsequently, they begin offering more and more left ideas and more left products and services. I believe this came to a crescendo in the 2015-2016 Trump versus Clinton campaign because the already left-calibrated corporate media sphere was blind to the staggering popularity of Donald Trump because the Overton window had already shifted left, and the actual populace wanted something that was discongruent with what those in power of corporate media and the Democrats saw. According to Pew Research data, Americans have drifted further apart from the center in the last 2 decades, those with a liberal bias drifting further left, and those with a conservative bias drifting further right. In the last few years, however, the left leadership, meaning the DNC, activists, and notable pundits, began going left with hasty abandon. As we see here, the divide of those with a liberal bias has become greater than ever in history of America, with around 8% of all liberal-biased Americans being as far left as possible. With a powerful force in politics and media driving the Overton window ever leftward, what is considered acceptable is now changing. Even a handful of years ago, saying you're a nationalist wouldn't raise any eyebrows as it's a rather banal term and didn't mean a lot to people. It was just kind of normal. Oh, that guy's a nationalist. Oh, he's really patriotic. He sure does love his country. And that's really where it stopped in most people's minds, even a few years ago. But now, even mention the word nationalist, that's enough to make some people lose their jobs or at least have to make a public apology.
In 1943, the following directive was issued from party headquarters to all communists in the United States. It read, "When certain obstructionists become too irritating, label them after suitable build-ups
as fascist or Nazi or anti-Semitic, and use the prestige of anti-fascist and tolerance organizations to discredit them. In the public mind, constantly associate those who oppose us with those names which already have a bad smell. The association will, after enough repetition, become fact in the public mind.
Just think about it. How often more than a few years ago did you hear people called Nazi, far right, anything that has to do with a villainized element of a loose association of the right, right-wing extremist, bigot, anti-Semite, neo-Nazi, Nazi, fascist. Think back just 5 years ago, 10 years ago. How often did you hear those words kicked around where you worked or the kind of media that you absorb? How about now? Or if you paid attention to the news 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, how often did you hear people always labeled as far right, right wing, extreme right, neo-Nazi, white supremacist sympathizer, that kind of thing? That's a mostly new development, right? I often speak about the power of language, how language is a toolbox, how our words are tools. We use those tools to build ideas, and thusly to build all that we are as an intelligent species. Everything we use today, from a spoon to a smartphone, started off as an idea in someone's head. This idea was transmitted to another human being with language, with words. And then, eventually, that thing, that idea, through language, became an element of our society, a facet or a real item that we can hold and use. I've become vehement in my passion for free speech lately. I know the phrase free speech extremist gets thrown around a lot, but I think it's a pretty good type of extremist to be, because regardless of where the line falls on free speech, even if it allows people using ugly words of hate to each other, I still would rather have that than the censorious nature of corporations and global media that we have right now, because the ideas that bounce off of each other, it's like this chaos engine of thought and creativity. And the more that you drive wedges into that, the slower that human progress and technology and ideas become. And that to me is revolting. Just think about it. What do you think would lead to a better future? The stagnation and the perversion of the natural phenomena of human thought exchange? Or just an open floodgate of ideas where all the best ideas get to fight each other and float to the top and the best ideas win? I know those are two extremes, but I would lean more towards the free chaos side, because once you get people in power that start shaping ideas and thoughts, well, they want it to conform to a very narrow facet of reality so they can control it, or in the globalist side of things, so they can profit on it and limit the market. That's quite the opposite of a free market and quite the opposite of capitalism, in my opinion. I often worry that I sound like a conspiracy theorist sometimes, because I talk a lot about SJWs and modern Marxism and all that, but I do think that globalists are changing definitions of words on purpose. Not like there's some scheming Illuminati of evil small hat wearers actively and purposefully trying to change the thoughts in our heads, but I do think that the erosion of language is because of this type of market control by what I call the monopostate, the unholy union of multinational megacorps and an ever-worsening system of authoritarian governments. The first part of this video shows the connection of forced language and a shift towards far-left ideology. Now, I'm going to show how such things are connected to this globalism.
Exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So basically America is stuck with demoralization, and unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of Americans, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy and patriotism.
I noticed something when reading about France and their riots recently. Apparently, the definition of nationalism has changed recently, or at least that's what some sources, namely Google, would have you believe. To me, nationalism is what I learned from books growing up, and apparently the Stanford definition of nationalism is still the same as I learned decades ago, which is merely a binding sentiment to your fellow people along the lines of cultural and/or ethnic identity, and doesn't necessarily rely on a proper state or government. When I went to read about the differences between nationalism and patriotism, I noticed how biased the definition of nationalism was on Google. Not only does it now list xenophobia, chauvinism, and jingoism as direct synonyms, but more insidiously, the definition includes buzzwords meant to further increase the demonizing of anyone who goes against Google's obvious leftist bias. Notice the word extreme appears twice in this small clump of just a few dozen words, as well as the words frightening and superiority making an appearance. Now where do we hear those words a lot these days? Do other sources define nationalism this way? Merriam-Webster doesn't. Here, it states that nationalism does not imply a feeling of superiority, and even points out that nationalism is separate from jingoism because nationalism doesn't involve military conflict or conquest. Encyclopedia Britannica doesn't either. It even points out that nationalism is the most ubiquitous binding sentiment of humanity when it comes to what defines a people and holds them together. They even say it's the defining characteristic of the modern era. Then I came across dictionary.com's definition. While not loaded with biased language and framing like Google's, I noticed it included the word excessive and listed chauvinism as a third definition. Not a synonym, mind you, but as an actual definition. Chauvinism as a definition for nationalism. Not even Google's definition blurb listed chauvinism as a definition. Subtle, but bold. We all know about Google and their allegiances, but what about dictionary.com? I'd never thought about it. Most of you probably haven't either. So I did some digging to find out who owns dictionary.com and discovered that a multi-billion-dollar international media conglomerate called IAC, headed by Barry Diller, known media billionaire entrepreneur, and Joey Levine, or Levin, I'm not sure how to say it, rich and influential San Francisco media mogul. Reading through the wiki, I can't say I was shocked to learn that Google has a multi-billion-dollar deal with IAC, namely involving search and data sharing, for the last 2.5 years. But I was taken aback by other things I started learning. Namely, just how many of the most important apps and sites that Westerners use every day to communicate with each other. All the main dating apps? Well, except Grindr. Ask.com, Tutor.com, The Daily Beast, The Daily Burn, College Humor, and even Vimeo. Together, these sites have hundreds of millions of users in the Anglosphere, and even more beyond. So we know that two mega-rich, international influential media giants are the main two who run IAC. But look who else is on the board. None other than Disney globalist Michael Eisner and lefty globalist Chelsea Clinton. These huge multinational corporations and neo-lib and/or progressive politicians are diametrically opposed to nationalism. You can find dozens of connections between Google, Twitter, Facebook, other media giants, globalist politicians, and even more once you start following the money.
You follow drugs, you get drug addicts and drug dealers. But you start to follow the money, and you don't know where the fuck it's gonna take you.
But he left one final warning.
1984 is, I believe, a quite terrifying masterpiece. So terrifying, in fact, I don't think I should like to read another like it. You once claimed that you have an ability to face unpleasant facts. Is that what you've demonstrated in 1984 by drawing an accurate portrait of the future?
I think that allowing for the book being, after all, a parody, something like 1984 could actually happen. This is the direction the world is going in at the present time. In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph and self-abasement. The sex instinct will be eradicated. We shall abolish the orgasm. There will be no loyalty except loyalty to the party. But always there will be the intoxication of power. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
I want to make content that my viewers enjoy while not deviating from the messages that I think are important. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you like DDA? Do you like deep double analysis where I take a couple of things and focus on one element of the culture war? Or maybe another element of philosophy itself divided from politics and society? Let me know what you think. As always, please like, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And if you can, spare a small amount of your resources. I appreciate anything you can contribute. Your resources allow me to focus on making more frequent and higher quality content, and you can find my PayPal and Subscribestar in the information below. I hope you all had as much fun participating in this presentation as I had making it and sharing it. And remember, don't let it happen.